Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today discussing linebacker Roquan Smith and the Baltimore Ravens agreeing to a monster deal, a 5-year, $100 million contract for Roquan Smith. Remember, the Ravens just traded for Roquan Smith from the Chicago Bears right in the middle of the season. He's having probably the best stretch of play in his entire career, and the Ravens will lock him up long term, Sam. So let's discuss the ramifications here. There's a lot to discuss as far as linebacker value and long-term value of the contract, the Ravens being a really analytically driven organization. What was your instant reaction to the Roquan Smith deal?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction was I think the Chicago Bears were absolutely right to want no part of that contract and cash in on him when they had the opportunity to and trade him away. Like Chicago, given where they are right now, which is a stripped down roster, just about to start this rebuild, like you couldn't give Roquan Smith that kind of contract. He just isn't the kind of cornerstone that you can build everything else around on that sort of money. But for Baltimore, we've seen this season, like he makes a different impact for their defense than he makes for the Chicago defense because they have better players already. They're more complete. He can make a difference, value add on top of the kind of defensive talent that they already have that makes his value different for Baltimore than it was for Chicago. Like it's not a like for like thing. So I think the Bears did a great job of getting out of this. Baltimore, though, it becomes a lot more interesting because, you know, the real analytics nerds, you and me, we're just kind of charlatans here. Like we're guys that came to this thing from a different place. You know, I'm not a math guy. You're a baseball player. What do you know about numbers? So we don't know what we're doing, right? But the real nerds, the real analytics nerds are in absolute shambles right now because they hate giving money to an off the ball linebacker. And yet their team, their Ravens, their Mecca, the team that's more analytically sharp and driven than anybody else in the league, they handed the big money out to him.
So that usually leads to two reactions, though, right? It's either what are they doing, or what do they know? What do the Ravens know? Where their analysis is so much further than our analysis. They have more data. They have more stuff, right? That they're looking at that we're not. I saw old friend Eric Eager actually tweeting through it, basically saying he's seen a couple analytical models that have completely different results when it comes to Roquan Smith, and I could see where that would come from. Let me try to guess if first off, let me just say this. Just because the Ravens might be analytically inclined, and we know a lot of the people that work there, and they've got the biggest team of analysts and everything, it doesn't mean that they're the final decision makers, right? They're not the only ones in the room making decisions. And I'll also say, in front offices, they're not what Moneyball depicted, right? It's not like one side of the room is the data dorks that you're talking about, the other side is the scouts, and they're hurling insults at each other. It's a collaborative effort in this whole thing. From a scouting perspective, wouldn't you love Roquan Smith? We loved him coming out of Georgia. He's got all the skills. Our coverage grades back up the fact that he's been a fantastic player there. I think a part of this is they're paying for his coverage elements. They're paying for this like high volatility defense, right? If Roquan Smith has a high end season, he's a game changer from a coverage standpoint. And you could also point to a team like the 49ers and Fred Warner. Whether you think Fred Warner's direct impact on the team is overrated, underrated, Fred Warner's been this linchpin in the middle of one of the best defenses over the last couple of years for the 49ers, and it allows them to just control the middle of the field, run a variety of coverages. That's one element. There's another element I want to discuss too, but that's my initial take is the coverage ability, the athleticism that Roquan Smith brings to the table is part of the reasoning here for the Ravens.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you're right. There is an important point that the Ravens, everybody that's analytically minded, anybody that's also a data nerd in Baltimore, they might all hate this move. Like we assume like when a team makes a move, everybody in that building signed off on it and they're all pulling in the same direction. Half of the people in that building might think it's a terrible idea. Who knows? Like we know, we talked to people specifically that hated the idea of paying Zeke Elliott a giant contract in Dallas, and yet they were resigned to the fact that they knew full well the people cashing the checks were going to make the move happen. So, we can't assume that just because a move happens, everybody thinks it's a good idea. But even if it is, like there are reasons why you would like Roquan Smith and believe he's worth money. Like whether or not that's correct or not is a different matter. But there are people out here tweeting the on-off splits when Roquan Smith is playing for Baltimore versus when he hasn't been there this year. Like every single NFL data point in the world, there are confounding factors there. Like, look at the teams they played when Roquan Smith was on the team. It's not a good run of offenses. Like, it's not as simple as Roquan Smith means better defense. Like, they played some pretty terrible offenses as well. So, like, that's part of this whole thing, is that not any single data point you're looking at is clean. Like, it's never going to be a simple, the number says. That's why all these analytics, all the announcers during games, it's absurd. Well, the numbers say this. The numbers never say one thing unequivocally, and yet that's what we try and ascribe to them every single time.
The NFL playoff picture is locked in, and my go-to place for wildcard round action is DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. To kick off the road to Super Bowl 57, new customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, all new and existing customers can get a no-sweat bet each day of the wildcard round this weekend. Just place any NFL bet of your choice, and if it loses, you'll get a free bet back up to $10. Action's so good, why bet on NFL playoffs anywhere else? So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code PFF. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL and get $200 in free bets instantly, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with the code PFF. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Yeah, it's a good point, Sam. There's never just like a number that says this and a number that says that. On-off splits are generally noisy, but here's why I think Roquan Smith has graded better with the Ravens. And we said this at the time when they made the trade. His run defense has been poor from our grading standpoint. Coverage has been good overall throughout Roquan Smith's career. But I think situation does matter. And I'm assuming whatever, again, I don't know if all the analysts in Baltimore completely agree with the deal or not, but if they were looking at the situation, and this happens a ton in the NBA, which is trying to put one player into this completely different scenario. In football, one scheme to the next scheme, putting him in a different scheme, did that either hide his weaknesses in run defense, or did it put him in better position to succeed? Because he's not great at taking on blocks at the second level. He's not great as an overall run defender. But if you could protect him with bigger bodies up front, which the Ravens have, he's had a much better run defense grade. So do the Ravens account for that analytically in this whole process?
Yeah, it's like what we said up top. I think his value is different for Baltimore than it is for Chicago. The Bears have one of the worst defensive lines in the entire NFL. They don't get any pressure. They're not great against the run. They're a bad unit to have in front of him. Baltimore is a good defensive front, and they're particularly good at the kind of stuff you're talking about, just getting bodies in between offensive linemen and linebackers. So he should be a better player in Baltimore. Now, the tricky part is, well, how much is that worth? And how much is what he can now do as a run defender and as a coverage linebacker? Like, how much is that worth in today's NFL? And that's the question everybody's trying to answer, right? And again, there's not one definitive, this is what it is. It's kind of a feel thing. And it's particularly relevant because, like, you don't get to just say, this is what that's worth. Here's the contract we're offering you, right? Because, like, he's like, well, I'm a good linebacker coming up due for my contract. I want top of the market money. This is what that looks like. So it's always a more complicated discussion.
Let me do this again, because I've referenced the NBA. I've been listening to a lot of NBA analytics discussions, getting ready for Sloan, Sam. They've done a ton of studies on how players interact with each other, right? What's the best starting five? We haven't necessarily done that type of deep dive here at PFF yet, but let me just project. Maybe they're doing that in Baltimore. And what would that look like? Sure. Where has Baltimore put their resources right now? So they've got almost $20 million per year locked up in Marlon Humphrey, a corner who can also play outside or inside, right? Marcus Peters, they got 1 year left of him at 14. And they just invested in Marcus Williams, the free safety multi-year deal at $14 million. Now add Roquan to the mix. I wonder if there's some sort of analysis that they're doing around the mix of players, a corner, a safety, and a linebacker, essentially all the levels, or just the fact that we're improving the back seven, right? We're improving. They've always worked back to front as far as where they invest their money over the last few years, and I'm wondering if that's a part of the Roquan Smith analysis here in Baltimore.
It could absolutely be, or, a combination of that and what we talked about before, that this is a team that's been able to scheme up pressure without necessarily investing a ton of money in the glamorous positions, like the pass rushers, the guys that you typically see getting paid a ton of cash. They let Matthew Judon walk out the door because they knew they'd be able to replace the pressure that he brought without any kind of problems. They've been drafting guys very, in the top couple of rounds of the draft and using those guys as main parts of their pressure package. So maybe they just simply view the back seven is where you spend money on veteran players. The front seven or the front four is where you go and draft guys and get them cheaper.
So just to wrap it up, I just want to be fair here. I've spent a lot of time theorizing what the really smart Ravens could have been doing. The other side of it is they overpaid for a linebacker, a position nobody around the NFL is valuing. They're completely wrong. Roquan Smith's a good, not great player, and that's it. There was a stupid move by the Ravens. That's absolutely possible as well. So let us know. What do you think? Roquan Smith, long-term signing for the Ravens. It's the PFF NFL Daily.